Everybody. How's everybody doing today? Good, good. Perfect. Just one quick reminder before we get started here, if just remember to silence your cell phone. Great. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this amazing panel discussion about Alberta electricity market fundamentals, put on by Women+Power and generously sponsored by Capital Power and hosted by Osler. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leah Izakovitz. I'm the new executive director here at Women+Power. Just a show of hands, how many people here is it your first time attending a Women+Power event? Okay, so you're like me. It's my first event too.
Well, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. And I can see that there's many returning people here, and I think that it speaks to the value of the events and the programs that we offer. So I'm thrilled that you're joining us here today to get a behind-the-scenes look at a 24/7 market, a fireside chat and Q&A on market design and fundamentals, and how generation and storage technologies are shaping the Alberta electricity market. Osler, our host today, has generously provided the lunch for everyone here. Afterwards, you can grab and go or stay around and network in person with your peers following the presentation. This event is also being recorded, so we will distribute it later on if you need to leave early or wish to share with your colleagues afterwards. I want to highlight that, I was just gonna get to my slide here. Oh yeah, here we go. So I want to highlight that proceeds from today's event will be donated to Fear is Not Love, which is the brand evolution of Calgary's women's emergency shelter. Capital Power and Enfinite has donated as well, and in total, we've raised close to $3,000 for Fear is Not Love. So let's give a round of applause to everybody who made that happen today. I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement. I was born in London, Ontario, but now I live in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. As a Métis person myself, I don't know very much about my Métis inheritance because of our colonial history, but in making this land acknowledgement, I commit to building relationships with Indigenous people. We are joining you here today from the city where the Bow and Elbows rivers meet, in the Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta. The traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda, Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. This land is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I just want to share a little bit with you about Women+Power. Many of you are Women+Power members. We were founded in 2020 and have since grown to nearly 1,400 members. In fact, we had an event here last year, and I believe we're at about 700 members. So we've actually doubled our numbers in about a year. And our goal is to connect and inspire women in Alberta's power industry. And we also welcome men to be our allies. Some of our board members are here today. So if you want to just give a little wave, definitely stay, yeah, right at the back. Stay around and say hello as well. And just to reiterate some of the work that we're doing, our goal is to develop supportive, influential, and accessible community through our events and programs and PD opportunities. We strive to create an environment where women feel empowered and have access to information and resources and services that they need to succeed in their careers. We love to collaborate with our sponsors and partners to support and establish goals and initiatives related to diversity and inclusion. I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing today, and especially events like this. We have a sold-out event. We have nearly 300 people attending online and in person, and I think it speaks to the interest and the value that we offer to our members. So again, our events and our programs would not be possible without the generous in-kind and sponsor donations from our valued sponsors. So I would like to introduce our moderator. Our moderator is Yining Yuan. She's also the treasurer at Women+Power. Yining has always been keen to see more females in the power industry, and being a part of Women+Power, Yining is appreciative of our members, our sponsors, and allies coming together to enable event and networking opportunities such as this. At Macquarie, Yinning advises in the power and carbon sector and enjoys collaboration opportunities with all of her stakeholders. I will now hand it over to Yinning to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. So now I'll provide a brief intro of our panelists before we jump into the main event. I'll start with Jill. Jill was born and raised Calgarian, who always thought that she would be in the oil and gas industry, but by chance found the power industry in 2009 with a job application to Harcourt and never looked back. Since then, her passion for the industry has only grown, knowing that the electron has yet to be replaced, and the demand for the megawatt will only continue. During her summer road trips, you can find Jill staring at the transmission lines with the intrigue of power flows and telling her children the exact names of the transmission lines. To which they respond, Kumang. Next, we have Paula. Paula is a seasoned commercial lawyer with 25 years of experience practicing energy and construction law. She practices in construction, development, acquisition, and divestiture of energy and infrastructure projects in Canada and abroad, with focus on renewables, energy transition projects, power purchase agreements, and carbon credit transactions. Paula works with the top energy companies and utilities in the country. And then we have Mike. Mike is an accomplished professional engineer and the technical authority at Enfinite. With his expertise and dedication, he leads interdisciplinary teams to design, plan, develop, construct, and operate Enfinite's projects and developments. His expertise in optimizing and integrating smart grid technologies has played a pivotal role in the successful development of a large-scale energy storage projects. So welcome to our panelists. We're very fortunate to have a diverse panel here today, each with different sets of perspectives, and we'll hear from them individually first. Clearly good at multitasking. Then we'll also open to the panel. As some of you have heard, the government of Alberta as well as ASO have recently announced some of the market change. And today we'll talk about them. With details remain to be seen, the market change have a focus on reliability and affordability with near-term and long-term implications. So we have created a matrix with 4 topics that you guys can vote on. So if you go to slido.com, so slido.com, and enter the event code 1326560. So this is open to both the in-person attendees as well as the remote online attendees. So we have 4 market change themes. The first one is short-term reliability. Second one, long-term reliability. Third one, short-term affordability. The fourth one is long-term affordability. You will get to vote 2 out of the 4 topics, and this is your chance to choose your venture, and those are the topics we'll be talking about. So Joe, in our panel preparation, we came up with this matrix. So can you tell us a bit more about the details behind each of the market change things so that people know and they're a knowledgeable voter?
Yeah, I was going to say, to know what you're voting for. Behind the first panel of short-term reliability, the topic that will be discussed long-term affordability is going to be, thank you. Oh, we have that one too. Under there would be negative pricing and co-op to It keeps dying.
We can share.
We can share. Don't worry. Yeah. It'll stay green. Yeah.
We can share.
I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you, Jill.
We'll just share it, Mike.
And then at the end, we'll turn to our audience and the panel for Q&A, especially for the audience in person. If we cannot get to your questions, please feel free to stay around after. Our panelists have generously offered to stay behind for about 20-30 minutes after the panel. So now we'll start with the panel discussion. First, we'll start with you, Jill. So you started as a real-time power trader at Harcourt back then, now Capital Power. So the last few years, we have read about record high electricity prices in Alberta. So can you tell us a bit more about what really sets the price in Alberta?
Yes, I'm going to have to take your mic. So in Alberta, like the simplest form of how prices are set is everyone can say supply and demand. But what does that really mean in Alberta? And it comes down to the merit curve. In Alberta, every generator that's greater than 5 megawatts submits their price quantity pairs to the AESO. And for example, what does that mean? A 400 megawatt unit would submit 400 megawatts of price quantity pairs to the AESO to be building the merit curve. They could put 200 megs at $0. They could put 100 megs at 100 and another 100 megs at $999, the price cap. So every generator in the province does this and it gets submitted into the AESO. And then the AESO aggregates this all from $0 prices all the way up to $999. That is in Alberta, you heard the term of a merit curve. And so what happens through the day, each hour, our prices are set, is it determines with those merit curves, does the AESO need to climb up? Is everyone wanting more power or is there less power? So what the AESO system controller does and how prices are set is they use this merit curve by generators that are submitted, and they'll climb up the curve when demand is high or climb down when it is not needed anymore. Things that can affect how we go up and down this curve is renewables. They come into the grid at $0. So on a high day of wind, strong solar, that's going to pull the merit curve down into the $0. Sometimes we've seen that in Alberta. That'll pull the merit curve down. But if wind's not there, solar's not there, a plant trips offline, the system controller has to climb up that merit curve now. And so it's the intersection of that price quantity pair that determines what the hourly settle is going to be. Things that can move it, like I said, is a forced outage, renewables. There might be a more expensive power market down in the US that power is getting exported out, or power can be imported into Alberta, which is the same as more supply coming in, you're going down the merit curve, more supply going up, you're going up the merit curve, it comes off. So that's essentially like the high level without going into the nitty gritty of exactly how it moves the power, but it's the merit curve and the intersection of supply and demand.
Yeah, we hear that electricity is a 24/7 market. And can you tell us a bit more about what's behind the 24/7 market? Is the merit order curve different, same? How is everything happening 24/7?
So I love this question because when I first started in the power industry, I would just go to bed at night and flick my light switch off. I'd wake up in the morning, flick my light switch on and be like, oh, this is amazing. But there's so many things that after joining this industry that I have such an appreciation for is when we all go to bed at night, we turn all our lights off. There's people working 24/7 because power trades every hour. And so what happens is you guys go to bed maybe 9, 10 o'clock, power demand starts going down, but the prices in Alberta could be still really expensive. Maybe there's not a lot of wind right now and some of the generators are ramping down to their min stables. That means there's a real-time trader working at 11 or 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, who's seeing the prices in Alberta and saying, you know what, I can buy cheaper price down in Washington or Oregon for like $15 and bring it into Alberta and get $50. So it's 24/7. You have operators that are working, you have real-time traders, and they're there on Christmas morning. They're there on New Year's Day. They're there on Thanksgiving. And the market is always active and trading. And I think it's just super interesting because before I was here, you just flick that light switch and go to bed. Then you're good to go.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate real-time traders more on Christmas mornings.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Boxing days. So Mike, my next question is for you. So we hear about the real-time market in 24/7. Can you share a bit more of your perspectives from engineering and operations behind this 24/7 market? Because for some of us, our only reference point is Homer Simpson at the Springfield nuclear power plant.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but not much. It's pretty much just pressing a button all the time. But yeah, there's really, as Jill said, it's got to happen 24/7. So now when a trader makes a trade and we need to fire up a plant, we have to have somebody there getting it ready. And there's not a lot of technology. There's some that you can't just turn it on either. There's a lot of prep work you have to do. So there's that constant communication of, I need advance notice of an hour or two to get things warmed up, get my fuel supply coming, and have it ready to go for that. So we have to have people on site 24/7 as well that I can call in the middle of the night or whenever there's an outage, because nothing ever happens between 9 to 5. It's always at 11:59 on Christmas night that I have to go and make phone calls. So my family doesn't like it very much, but it keeps the power on.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate that. And you come from Enfinite. It has a portfolio of energy storage assets. Storage is new to some of us. It's new to sometimes the power sector. Can you tell us a bit more? What is storage? Why haven't we seen it historically? And why is it important all of a sudden?
Yeah, for sure. Really, none of it's actually new technology. It's just being implemented at a big enough scale now, and it's become more cost effective to be able to implement it. I always try and make a pretty simple example of electricity is one of the few things we deliver to everybody that's being balanced, as Jill said, minute to minute. It would be like when you go to pump gas into your car and we're turning wells on and off to meet the gas demand of what you're putting in your car. Pretty much everything else we store it in a tank. So really that's what batteries and storage are. Alberta's not as lucky as a lot of other jurisdictions where we have lots of hydro in those, and that can act as storage. You can back it up with a dam and you're storing energy to use it later. So in Alberta, we've had to be a bit more innovative and use different technologies, and batteries are now at a scale that we can do it. And it's now just trying to roll it out at a scale and at an affordable rate for everybody.
When we were preparing this panel, we were gossiping about what just happened in January, how your organizations and your assets were able to support a grid. Are you able to share a bit more about that?
For sure. Yeah, it was a very stressful time, I will admit, because that was a real stress test of what everything could do. And it worked flawlessly, really thanks to all the guys in the field. I can take zero credit for it. They were all away from their families and watching everything. But it was a real balancing act, and all of the assets worked. It was minus 36. I looked at every site when we had to call, and we had to just dump everything all at once. It was very critical. We had to go for longer than expected as well. But it's the nice part about it being dispatchable, and what I spoke about earlier being like fire up time for a lot of other assets. These are basically instantaneous. You can hit a button and away it goes. So it's nice in that regard.
Yeah, it is. And then Paula, so next we'll go, when we think about battery, we think about wind and solar, the renewables. When they're not there, that's when the time is for battery to shine. But historically, Alberta has been the leader for renewables and for the renewables PPA in Canada, and we're very proud to say that. And from your perspective, from what you have seen as a commercial lawyer with energy and infrastructure companies, what do you think are the reasons that really set our market apart? Why do people come to this jurisdiction for renewables and PPAs?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the key is that we have a deregulated power market, which is really unique in Canada. So every other jurisdiction, every other province and territory, there's a crown corporation that is tasked with the responsibility of procuring all of the power needs of those jurisdictions. Unlike Alberta, it's private companies that are the ones that are supplying the power. And we have this power pool, which Jill did a fantastic job explaining. So thankfully, I don't have to do that. But that's really what has facilitated the ability for private actors to come and actually buy renewable power and associated environmental attributes in this province. So it's quite unique, and also it's an energy-only market. So Jill did a really good discussion about how when the merit order they're going through, only those that are selected and dispatched by the AESO, those are the generators that are producing in every hour. So with this kind of market structure, it allows these private corporations to contract for renewable power and to enter into power purchase agreements, which is kind of one of my areas of specialty. The typical structure is called a virtual power purchase agreement. So I'm sure many of you have heard that terminology. What it means really is that there's not a physical delivery of renewable power to the off-taker or the buyer. Everybody is delivering their power onto the grid and everybody is taking their power off of the grid. But these contracts allow for financial settlement essentially around the pool price. So the off-taker, the generator, they will agree on a strike price and they'll come up with a fixed price for the power that they will pay under that contract. These contracts are typically longer term. You see some that are shorter term, maybe 5 years, but typically we're talking about 10 to 20 to 25-year commitments. The big driver for entering into these types of contracts is the associated environmental attributes. So the buyers that we see they range, they're in every industry. Obviously, some of them are buying because they need actually to get tier offsets or they need other carbon credits for compliance purposes. But a lot of them, it's for their ESG goals, for their sustainability goals. So they're looking to do a long-term purchase. It does allow them also to hedge the power price. But the big driver for a lot of these companies, we see all of, retail companies, we see telecommunication companies. We're seeing a lot more demand, especially now that people are paying attention to sustainability. They're getting a lot more creative and they're getting involved in the marketplace. So it's really kind of an exciting time to see all of those things happening. So the way that the financial settlement works, and again, it's great that Jill explained how the power pool price is set in every hour. Again, under the long-term power purchase agreement, you've agreed on a fixed strike price. And then how the financial settlement works is that there's a settlement period essentially for every hour, and the payments flow either way. So payments can flow to the generator or payments can flow to the buyer. So it depends again, of course, of whether the power pool price is below or above the strike price. So again, if the strike price is above what the power pool price is, then it's that delta will be paid back to the buyer, and the opposite is true. So the real key and why we see renewable companies entering into these arrangements is it gives them a steady revenue stream. Otherwise, they're relying on this very volatile hourly price that's changing all the time. And it makes it very difficult for them to plan to ensure they're going to have a revenue stream. So these power purchase agreements are really meant to be a win-win for the industry where they can, get that revenue certainty. They can get project financing. Project financing is often not available for a full merchant, wind or solar farm because of the volatility, it's difficult for lenders to get their head around the uncertainty around that type of revenue stream. So this is a way that it's really helped facilitate wind and solar and other types of renewable projects in the province. So I think it's why there's almost a rush here of companies that have come out to do business here, because in the other jurisdictions, it's really the generators that they can be active in those markets, but they only have those opportunities when there is a power call. So for instance, BC Hydro has announced their clean power call, but that was the first one in, I think, about 10 years. So, so if you're if you're trying to get projects off the ground in BC, you're going to be waiting for the government to come out with those power calls. So that's really why we've seen so much activity here and so much interest. It really does facilitate also the ability for the private companies to come in and buy power and buy environmental attributes for meeting their ESG goals.
Thank you. I think that has covered really the fundamentals of the electricity market, all the way from how the market transacts, how the operators have to give up their Christmas, as well as how we can attract as investments and ensure supply and demand in this province. Now that we have covered the basics, let's see if Osler can show us the voting results, or you guys can trust me. So I think we have long-term reliability as the top one. And the second one is the long-term affordability. So we'll start with long-term reliability. So Jill, you'll go first.
Thank you. So I guess to dive into this topic a little bit more on long-term reliability, what is being proposed to come into place in 2027 by the Alberta government is the two topics I highlighted earlier was a day-ahead market. And then also reserve scarcity pricing. So a day-ahead market is not something new to power markets. Day-ahead markets are pretty common all over North America. Currently in Alberta, it's just the real-time market we've always seen where we go up and down and have this hourly price. And so the proposed way to get long-term reliability is the government is looking at bringing in a day-ahead market. And what that essentially may look like, we don't know all the details yet, but essentially it is the system controller is going to forecast the next day ahead, and they're going to have the ability for other gas generators or other generators to commit online and clear at a price that makes sense for them around their variable cost. Instead of having this real-time volatility of going up and down. So that's what's being proposed. We'll see what actually comes out with. And then another topic that has been proposed is reserve scarcity mechanism pricing. This is something that they use in a market called ERCOT, which is Texas Power Market, another deregulated power market. And essentially what that does is as capacity in the grid becomes less and less, so on those days like in January, where we were really, really starting to run out of power, is prices will start going up higher and higher and higher. And what is that meant to do? It is meant to incent people to either turn their load off. It is meant to incent imports in from other jurisdictions. And so that is one thing they're proposing, to send the right price signal to other power generators, other markets to bring power in, or those who are using power. So that's what's being proposed.
Yeah. That's great to hear about the day-ahead market as well as the main scarcity pricing. So we're going to mix up the panel a little bit, and we're going to catch Paula next. So in the PPA agreement that I haven't seen that many, right now the market, we have real-time market pricing, and right now we have a pricing cap at $1,000 for 999.99, something along the line. But so how do you address that with that market change in the contracts?
Yeah, it's really kind of an interesting time because there have been so many policy changes that have been coming down. So how do you contract in that type of, in light of all of that uncertainty? Specifically around the pricing, I think negative pricing and a pricing above $1,000 per megawatt hour is something that is being talked about as a policy change. They want to be able to signal to the market better, when prices are high and when prices should be actually negative. Negative pricing means that, of course, the generator would actually have to pay to be dispatched at that time. In the contracting scenario, really what we see in the PPAs is that there's typically a price floor. So you set a price floor at $0. This is not new. The AESO has been talking about negative pricing for a while, so it's something I've always incorporated into my power purchase agreements that I advise on, is to set the price floor, because otherwise your buyer is not just paying the strike price, they would actually be having to also top up by that negative pricing amount. So that's something that's been around for quite a while. I think a lot of parties have kind of thought about that. And the justification is that sellers are in the best position to manage that risk, right? They're the ones that are bidding into the market, and they can try to reduce generation during those periods where there's extreme oversupply and there's a signal to the market that there is actually a negative pricing situation. Now, the pricing in excess of $1,000 is quite interesting. And one thing that we haven't seen, or I haven't seen yet in my practice, but is whether there will be price ceilings or price caps that come into play in PPAs. So typically you just have the strike price that's agreed, you have the settlement against the hourly power pool price, and then you have a calculation. Obviously the payments are calculated then usually on a monthly basis, they're aggregated, and then you figure out who is actually going to get the payment. Because again, the generator is collecting the power pool price for when they're dispatched from the market. But we really haven't seen, dealing with whether there would ever be price caps. And so there could be times where pricing, if it's over $1,000, that's really, there's the power pool price is that high, and there's a bit of a windfall, I guess, in that situation. And typically, of course, that money under the power purchase agreement would go to the buyer. They've agreed that they're going to pay the strike price, but they get the benefit of everything over that. But it's interesting, if sellers are going to be, shouldered with taking on negative price exposure, it may be something that we start to see in these agreements going forward, whether they're going to start putting some ceilings in so that they can maybe recapture a little bit of that upside, or share it with the buyer instead of passing it all on to the buyer.
That's great to hear that you got that covered. We're not relying on a very, very simple changing law clause to cover everything, that this has been well contemplated. We feel very, very assured. So Mike, our next question for you is that now we're looking at long-term reliability. We have been relying on battery a little bit, as well as operating reserves a little bit, and you mentioned about that. Can you tell us a bit more about operating reserves and how the battery plays a role in that?
Yeah, for sure. There's some pretty interesting stuff being talked about being added for the long-term reliability for 2027. With that administrative pricing curve, that's going to tie into that market and really what drives it. But there's also talk of adding what will be called most likely strategic reserves, which is basically where the ISO will be able to contract long-run assets or batteries or something like that, that when they see there's a supply crunch coming, they can turn you on, and they're not waiting to see that accelerated pricing. That's supposed to be kept for when there's true scarcity events like January, like last Friday. Those will still happen, but that's meant to incent people. If those start happening a lot, more people will come, more stuff will get built, so that you don't go into that curve so often. But strategic reserves gives the ISO a new tool where they can contract and secure those resources to call upon that right now they can't really. Everything is bid in day ahead for the ancillary service market. So they only have a 1-day outlook of what they can call on, and they're limited of what they can call during that time as well.
Yeah, it's great to hear that operating reserves are not simply regulations, spinning or supplemental. The ASO is expanding their pool of reserves that they can call on to provide the long-term reliability that we really need. So the next voting topic we have is long-term affordability. So maybe we'll start with negative pricing, or who wants to take that? Jill break size.
I broke it. So negative pricing, it's never been something in Alberta. Like in Alberta, we have one price for the whole province, no matter where the load is, no matter where the generator is producing. When you introduce the negative pricing, it's trying to send the right signal in the right area. And so in other markets that have implemented negative pricing is what you kind of have as locational marginal pricing, or you could almost say you get to split Alberta up into 6 little pieces. And pending where the demand is and where all the generation is, you could have pricing that's there. And so what would happen in negative pricing is when wind is just howling in the southwest of Alberta, maybe there's 4 gigs coming out of that region, and maybe the demand in that region is only 500, 600, 700 megs, prices are going to go negative because that supply is not meeting the demand in the right spot. And it's to send the right price signal to say, maybe we don't build there. Maybe we start building up here in the central wind region of Alberta where there's a lot of demand. So that is one thing of like affordability for like negative pricing of like how it should function. What will be the solution for Alberta? That's yet to be determined because each market has a little bit of different nuances. So.
Thank you. So it's not just about negative pricing, it's also about transmission system, how to allocate the cost, whether in real time in the market as well as in the build out. So Mike, can you tell us a bit more from as an engineer, as an operator, how does the transmission work? Why do we have congestion? Why are we changing from the current system of congestion-free system to a future system where it's more localized?
Yeah, it really ties in nicely to what Jill was just saying about sending the right signals of where you should and shouldn't build. And that's what is causing a lot of the stress on the transmission system right now. We're looking at it from a standpoint of you can connect wherever you want. So you pick the best place for your resource. And then we figure out how to connect it later and build the transmission out for it. So being able to send pricing signals like negative pricing is going to help outside of the other mechanisms we have like guac and things like that. It's a very strong signal. It can also help bring in load into those areas as well. If you start getting a lot of negative pricing in an area, and people will want to put load there, which helps offset transmission as well because it gets used more locally. So that's really going to be the key drivers behind that.
That sounds like coming up, our investors will have a lot of decisions to make, whether they're going to be a load or a generator. Is no longer about generation, cost of generation, but also location, 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 as our realtor keeps telling us. So Paula, you advise a lot of energy companies and utilities as they look forward for investments. They have to start planning for investments maybe in the next couple of years for them to come online in 5-10 years from today. So how are you advising them, helping them navigate this uncertainty as we have a lot of things to think about, but not much to know just yet?
Yes, I agree that there is a fair amount of uncertainty, but there is still a lot of demand, as I said, for power purchase agreements. And we are seeing parties that want to move forward in light of the uncertainty. So we have a lot more certainty around some of the new rules that have come down from the government around, the land use restrictions that they're putting on renewable projects. So those are becoming better understood, better known. But areas that are there's still a little bit of uncertainty around is the rules around reclamation requirements that will be required for these renewable projects. Again, the transmission system, the government is reviewing the transmission regulation at this time. There is talk about allocation of transmission costs going forward to renewables. So that is something that needs to be considered. And how will you address that? Because of course, if you're going to contract, next week on a power purchase agreement, and you don't know what those future allocation of costs might be, how are you going to address that? And that again is unfortunately where I'm going to drone on a little bit about change in law clauses. So those are very important in these agreements. They have historically been fairly boilerplate, but I think with all of the changes in the market, we are spending a lot more time to really may clearly define in those definitions what is considered to be a change in law and what is not. So we know what policy changes might be coming, but we might not know the specifics. And then how can we write that into the definition to make it clear what are we assuming is already going to be priced into your strike price? It's already going to include all of those risks, and we assume that the seller has taken into account when they've agreed to a strike price. And where are the areas of uncertainty going forward where a generator may be nervous because there are additional costs that may be coming down that are just not known at this time. So that's where you often see these change in law provisions. Unfortunately, the definitions now seem to span multiple pages. I'm sorry to say. They're not getting shorter. They're getting more complicated. They're getting very specific about the different types of changes that are going to be included and would actually trigger a mechanism for the parties to revisit that strike price. And so that's the other side of that coin is if there is a change in law, you have a long-term contract and the parties need to figure out a way to adjust the strike price accordingly so that it can factor in those costs. So often there can be you have to decide, is there going to be a sharing of those costs or is there going to be an increased adjustment upward to really pass on those costs to the buyer? So again, there's a lot more attention paid because parties are still looking to contract in this market and they just want to figure out mechanisms on how they're going to address some of these areas where there may be unanticipated impacts to their projects and the cost of running them going forward.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It's really helpful to understand that changing law now contemplates specific scenarios so that it's not a blanket solution. People really have thought out well ahead before how to address them so that there's no surprise. We definitely rank changing law on the top 2 legal clauses at work for us. It's changing law and force majeure. They're always constantly fighting for the top 1. Now that we close this conversation on a high note, changing law, let's see if our attendees have any questions. Yeah, go ahead. Hi, Amy with Aida.
I mean, typically in the PPAs that I've seen, they do build in an escalation factor. They don't escalate with the carbon price. So that's really the driver for off-takers to enter into these arrangements, because they get the benefit of the environmental attributes from a renewable project. And it's typically going to be at a strong discount to what the ultimate carbon price will be. Because especially like if you look at what the Alberta government did during the REP program, they got $40 a megawatt hour, and they're getting all the environmental attributes for those renewable projects. And of course, the carbon price is increasing over the time. They're, of course, not using it in the same way private players are. They're retiring those carbon credits that they get. But private players, it's definitely a way for them to help manage their compliance costs going forward. And if they're locking in an $80 per megawatt hour PPA price today, they are really getting the benefit of having a steady flow of emission offsets or different types of carbon credits, and they're getting it at a price. And it's usually the escalation factors, although I think they're being revisited because of, inflation has kind of gone a little crazy as of late. But typically, historically, they were tied to CPI, or they might be tied to like a 2% increase. So they've been fairly nominal. So again, that's really the driver for so many parties that have come here to really backstop these projects. It gives them the mutual benefit of both locking in their pricing to get those carbon credits, but they also often get marketing rights. So I always give the example, like if you go to IKEA, they backstopped early on the Old Man Wind project up in northern Alberta, and they have a great big poster of it when you go to their store, and they were one of the early players to enter into one of these PPAs. So I think, really what I've been seeing is just the escalation. I'm not sure if we're going to see some of the pricing has definitely, because of the volatility in the market and because carbon prices people are really starting to pay attention now that we're at $80 per ton. So it's kind of interesting to see. I haven't seen greater escalation factors, but I'm assuming that we may start to see that. And as I said, we also may start to see some of those price caps where there's kind of a sharing of some of that upside over the longer term.
Thank you, Paula. I'll just repeat the question for the online attendees first. So it's how do PPA contracts, how can they adjust the carbon pricing schedule, the escalation? Any more questions in this room?
Hi there. So my name is Kelly Hall, and I'm with Women+Power Technologies. And the question I have is about VPPs. I haven't seen very much of virtual power plants in Alberta. We've seen them in a lot in different jurisdictions in the US. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, and I'm not really sure who to address this question to, about bringing in virtual power plants and using things like residential power and adding it to the grid. Oh,
maybe Mike?
Seems like a bad question.
There's been a lot of talk about kind of the microgrid type space and being able to use residential power, being able to sell back in. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles to do that in Alberta, I would say. Bill 22 is a big step in the right direction where you can now self-supply and export. So that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for that type of stuff. But if we look at things like what they can do in California now, where you can use like your EV plugged into your house, you can it can contribute to the grid. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles. We don't have smart meters in most jurisdictions. So there's a lot of infrastructure that would need to be put in place to make that a possibility. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that does. We have one more. We'll take one last question in the room, and then we'll take one question online.
Great. It's Karen Borgerson from NMAX Energy. So probably more of a question for Joe and Mike, but what is the role, if any, of the retailers and by extension customers in some of the proposed changes to the regulation? Yeah, what do you see as the impact to retailers and customers with some of these proposed regulation? What role can they play through as we transition through this?
I can help you guys a little bit. Maybe we can have smart meters. How do smart meters come into play? How do we educate how people can place their loads? If you want to mine your Bitcoin, where is the ideal location that Joe, the realtor, would like to recommend?
I'm on the wholesale side, so
I can jump in a little bit. I think a key thing there would be like it's kind of the meter thing, but right now the general consumer is not price responsive. They don't look at the hourly pool price and respond to it. When they look at their bill, they don't see it when it is high, and if they turn off, it doesn't affect their bill. So I think that's where retailers can play a big role, and we get to having true demand response. Especially we're going to go to negative pricing and raise the cap. That's a pretty key tool that the retailers can add a lot. And tying in the locational marginal pricing, retailers have to be involved now because you're going to have trading between different jurisdictions potentially. That would be another role.
It's really helpful. We had one question online. This is probably for Jill. So some non-renewable generators know they're going to be called eventually and offer large quantities at very high prices. This has caused pool prices to increase significantly. What changes to the energy only and the merit order could help deal with this imbalance?
Okay, yeah. So that's being addressed in the regs that are coming in July 1st. So when I introduced the merit curve, is generators get to pick their price quantity pairs. Alberta is a deregulated energy market. And the one thing that's really unique about Alberta right now is you can portfolio bid. You can economically withhold your megawatts. Or you can say, you know what, I'll offer them up at $600 if you really need them in that curve. So what happens in that merit curve is there's gaps that start to form. You have a whole lot of megawatts up to about $55. And then all of a sudden, you know what, there's nothing for the system controller to dispatch until you're at the $600, $700 mark. And so that is within the market rules in Alberta. How is that going to be addressed and what's that's going to be changed? So the first change that's going to come through is the short term, which is the market power regulation mitigation. It's an MPR. And what that's going to do is effective July 1st is once a generator has made 1/6 of its unavoidable costs within that month, is now there is going to be a cap put on place on their offers. So instead of being able to say, I'm going to put all my megawatts at $600, you are now going to be stuck. Once you've hit enough and you've made enough money by the calculation that'll be published by the AESO, that'll be your cap. And what is that cap going to be? It's currently pegged at $125. You will not be allowed to put your megawatts higher than that. Or in the case of an AECO event or AECO gas, because that's a fixed input into the cost for generators, it would be 25 times the Alberta natural gas price. So that's what's being proposed. That would come in July 1st and it comes all the way through. And then I think some certainty in what the long-term impacts of not having the merit curve behave like that will be the removal of like portfolio bidding. It would be the day ahead, you're committing in your volume, and that's typically you committed around your variable costs.
Okay. So I think that's the end of our panel. We thank our attendees, our sponsors, as well as our panelists.